Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Coolidge Corner Theatre. How's everybody doing tonight? Feeling good? My name is Mark Anastasio. I'm the Director of Special Programming here at the Coolidge, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to our special wide lens presentation of Black Panther. This is something. To start, it's something to be playing a superhero film in prime time at the Coolidge. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pretty excited about this. Tonight, this is a big deal for a comic book nerd like me. But we're also going to have a wonderful conversation following this movie. Our wide lens program here at the Coolidge has been going strong for almost 10 programs-ish now, and it's going to continue. This is a film series that seeks to focus on underrepresented perspectives, and doing that by watching film and having conversations afterwards. So we have a wonderful panel together. Is anyone watching Black Panther for the very first time tonight? First-timers seeing the movie, that is awesome. This film has received 7 Academy Award nominations. Yeah, including Best Picture. It's my vote for Best Picture. I'm going to get out of the way now, and I'd like to welcome to the microphone the co-creator of the Wide Lens program here at the Coolidge, Dr. Raul Fernandez.
Thanks, brother. Hey, y'all, I'm excited too. I want to get this film started. So really briefly, I want to do something here where we actually introduce our panelists before we get the movie started, so you can just know who's in the room and who you can expect to see in just a little bit. And so first and foremost, I want to introduce Monica Castillo over here. Give it up for her. Film critic, written for the New York Times, Washington Post, big feature in Elle magazine, no big deal. She's great. We also have with us Teja Arboleda. Where are you, Teja? Right over there. Oh, they're saying stand up. They want to see you. There you go. Teja is the president and creative director of Entertaining Diversity. We'll find out more about what that is. And also joining us in just a bit will be Phillip Martin, a senior investigative reporter with WGBH. So just give it up for Phillip. He'll be here soon. Yeah. We've been doing this series for about a year now, and we've got more films to come. Thank you for those who've come to many of these films in the past and who continue to stick with us. And I hope that those of you who are joining us for the first time become part of this Wide Lens family. We'd love to see you back here again. You'll see me again after the credits roll, all right? Thank you very much. Are you clapping for us, the movie? I'm not really sure, but I'm gonna take it. So a lot of you were seeing that for the first time. How you feeling about that movie? Yeah? Oh my. How you doing? Good to have you here. Please feel comfortable. Oh, you can take your coat off if you want. Whatever you want to do. Yeah. Okay, good. Whatever makes you happy. So once again, I'm Raul Fernandez. Really excited to be here with this panel, which I've briefly introduced earlier, but we'll do some longer introductions. We'll talk about this film a bit. We'll talk about representation in film, in media, and I think also outside of media too. We'll see how we do with that. So let's get it started. And I did say, I sort of warned a couple of you earlier, I'm going to have you sort of do some longer introductions about yourself. So maybe if we can start with Monica, you could just tell us a little bit more about you and what brings you here.
Sure, I'm Monica Castillo. I originally went to Boston University a few years ago. Go Terriers. And I've had a connection with this theater for a really long time. It was one of the first places that I really started getting into film, coming to the Midnight series here. And then somehow that kind of accidentally became my career. And I went to New York to pursue writing, and now I've written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Elle, Vanity Fair, a long list. I've been doing stuff for the Oscars, so I actually got to talk to the composer of Black Panther for No Film School, which is an outlet that looks specifically at more technical aspects of filmmaking. And I talked to Yalitza Aparicio from Roma for NBC News. Oh, we got some Roma fans. So yeah, it's been a really interesting Oscar season. It's definitely not been boring. And one of the exciting things is obviously that Black Panther is the first Marvel movie to get an Academy nomination for Best Picture.
Yeah. Welcome, Monica. Teja.
Hi, I'm Teja Arboleda. I am the president and founder of Entertaining Diversity. I teach issues of race and culture through entertainment. That would be theater and television. I've been a television producer for about 30 years, back when I used to have hair. I've made about 140 documentaries, mostly PBS and Discovery. And I'm a college professor and a diversity trainer. I came to the States when I was 19. I was born in the States. I am mixed race, so I am Black, Asian, and white. And I deeply, deeply respect all efforts to be inclusive in the media.
Welcome, Teja. Phillip?
No, thank you. First of all, I got to tell you, I love this theater. I think you do too. Am I right? I love this place. Thanks to you. Thanks to my fellow panelists, and thank you for coming out tonight. My name's Phillip Martin. I'm a senior investigative reporter at WGBH in Boston Radio. Do some television from time to time. Originally from Detroit. And in the 1990s, I wrote a piece for the New York Times looking at how art influenced history, but rather than how history influenced art, how art basically influenced history, and looked at movies like Potemkin in a Soviet movie that I think everyone's familiar with, and other movies. And movies are my passion. Though I, of course, do something other than focus on movies. I focus on street gangs, I focus on human trafficking, I focus on carbon offset schemes, and a lot of other issues related to the work I do, which is investigative reporting. But this is an issue that's very much essential to my very being. I'm working on a series right now on Indian caste, looking at the conditions of Dalits in this country, so-called untouchables. And one of the more important aspects of that is to understand what's happening in this country, I had to go to India. And one place you see the lack of representation in an extraordinary way is Bollywood, where Dalits and so-called lower caste people are often portrayed negatively, if portrayed at all. And that's something perhaps I can talk about as we move on tonight.
Welcome, Phillip Martin. What a cast we have tonight. So I want to start by asking you a question about the film. And when the film first came out, especially, there was a lot of sort of like hype and energy around it. I got to see it on opening night, and it was palpable, the energy, like kind of akin to, like, I don't know, seeing maybe like Hamilton on opening night or something like that, like the way that people felt about this movie. What is it? We'll start with you, Phillip, if that's right. What is it about this film that got folks so excited and maybe even made folks feel so seen?
Well, thank you very much. It's a good question. I went on opening night with a bunch of kids in Dorchester. Was part of a group of African Americans who took kids to see this movie. And they were excited. Some were already wearing costumes and doing the Wakanda thing. What it was, it's not just a question of seeing yourself in represented in some way on the screen, but it was seeing yourself represented in a way that was so powerful. And when I say that, I'm not talking about individual power. What they were seeing was a collective power, the notion of a tribe, a country, a nation, people who basically were asserting themselves. And you also saw the contradictions portrayed in this movie. The whole notion of good and bad was very nuanced, wasn't it? And with these kids, you saw them seeing that nuance, looking at that nuance on the screen, and the anticipation of seeing Black Panther was unbelievable. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every type of social media was a gaga over the possibility that something positive could happen on the screen and be sustained. And what was important for many people in the build-up to this movie was seeing a country that was technologically advanced. The notion of advancement, the notion that you were that you were being seen in the position, again, that wasn't just an assertion of skin color. This was not just about, pigmentation. This was about power and power being used in a way that is righteous, but also seeing yourself in ways that were, again, in contradiction. I don't know if anyone saw this article this week in the New York Times, an important article about a mathematician. And the article basically talked about an individual who had had full tenure, full professorship at Purdue University, left because he felt lonely. And lonely in terms of teaching mathematics and being taken seriously, even though he was at the top of his career. We're talking about an African-American male teaching mathematics. A dozen, the article pointed out, among several thousand people, many thousands, who basically have risen to the top of their field in mathematics. And then you see Wakanda. You see a country that is technologically advanced, and you see possibility. You see hope, you see dreams realized that go beyond the, if you will, the shape and the color of race.
Right. Appreciate that. I appreciate also this nuance around. I want to maybe even get more into that. Like Eric Killmonger kind of had a point, right? Maybe the way he wanted to go about it was not the best way, but there was some points there. Teja, in your mind, why does this film matter? Why is this film important?
I think two reasons. One is very visceral for me. It's a very emotional thing because for me it's the idea of what home means to us, and that would be our DNA home or our cultural home. And very rarely do superhero movies enter that discussion. There's always a little bit about where you come from, the origin story, but this is an origin story that's everyone's story. And it does leave you thinking how much we've left behind in all of these discussions about what it is to be, a superhero or a hero for your people. The idea of home in that respect. The other thing was really resonated with me is sort of tagging on to what you were just saying. So I grew up in Japan, where the concept of good and evil isn't the same as the concept of good and evil in superhero movies, typically like what you see in Marvel or DC Comics, in that there, as you use the word nuance, that it's not necessarily just bad and good, that there's always something else there. There's a reason why we do things that are disagreeable or bad. And there's a reason why we do good things, sometimes which are very selfish. But the way it was played out in this movie really resonated with me because it speaks to a larger common concept of what it is to be human. It goes really deep, much deeper than all other superhero movies that I've ever seen. So in those two respects, I think it resonates with me, but probably most people who've seen this movie.
All right, thank you. And Monica, tell us from your view, and also as a film critic as you watch this, but also someone who enjoys watching films, why do you think this film matters?
Well, I think I kind of got to see it first in a different context than a lot of other people. I went to a private screening that was for like geek girls. Like it's a group that's like that just gets together and celebrates comic books or different kinds of fandoms, whether it's anime, whether it's a TV show, and it was just mostly a whole theater full of women cheering and excited to see characters like Okoye, Nakia, Shuri. Got almost every cheer. More or less stole the movie away from T'Challa, but I think for me, as a woman who hasn't seen a lot of great roles for women in superhero movies, like you can almost forget Black Widow is in some of the Avengers movies. You'd be hard pressed to come up with a description for Scarlet Witch's character, but here everyone is so well written, everyone's so well characterized. You have their personality, you have the clothes that they wear, you have the way that they talk and they react to certain situations. It's it's so exciting, and it was so energetic that I felt like nothing else was going to live up to that screening. I was just so lively, and people were buzzing afterwards. I told my friend after we just finished watching this, is that this was the first time in a while that I had seen a Marvel movie that left me with that great feeling. I actually did want to see immediately what happens next. What's the sequel? Because, you know, it's been now more than 10 years since Iron Man. It's about to be 11 years since Iron Man premiered in 2008. So some of us are feeling a little bit fatigued. We've seen every superhero movie, including those on the DC side, and other ones that may be trying to cash in on that craze. And, you know, it's been a minute since a lot of us got excited, and a lot of us got excited about this.
Yeah. Ready for that spinoff with Okoye and Suri, and yeah.
I'm there.
I'm ready for that one. I was pulling some statistics from USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, your alma mater, Monica.
Another one.
Yeah, another one of your alma maters, right? And this speaks to one of the comments you just made. Across this was in 2016, and so across the 100 top grossing films of that year, 47 did not feature a single black woman or girl speaking on screen. 66 movies were devoid of Asian female characters, and a full 72 films erased Latinas. It's been a couple years. We got any better?
No.
Not quite.
So I have a kind of an explanation for that, which is unfortunately it takes so long to make movies that all of these calls for changes and things like that, it's very much trickling through a long system. We're probably not going to see real noticeable change for a few more years, but that doesn't mean we get to be quiet now. It means that we need to keep pushing, and we need to keep advocating for more change, more opportunities for women directors, more opportunities for directors of color. Like, that is a real issue that is not going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take a long time to build up people, to get those skills, to have that experience, and then to give them those opportunities.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit to that. It's an interesting perspective when you consider how many movies are made around the world. We do know that Hollywood is the biggest machine in terms of filmmaking. Bollywood is probably second, if not
Bollywood
the first.
produces more titles.
Yeah, true.
Yes.
But then going back to what he said earlier, you know, in terms of representation, right? But if you take a look at East Asian and Central Asian filmmaking, South American, even North and Central African and Middle Eastern, it's a different kind of representation question.
Yes.
Right.
But when we talk about, you know, if we're talking about representation, that's one thing. If we're talking about superhero representation, that's another thing. But in terms of representation, one of the problems that we have in this country is that we don't allow ourselves to enjoy movies that are made by other countries. Mm-hmm. So when we think about representation, it is a very American perspective. When there are thousands and thousands of movies that are made every year around the world, we don't get to see.
Right.
Thank you. Just to add to that, it also reminds me of the issue of class. Class is something that is horribly distorted in movies, but it's important to talk about it as in the context of representation. That brings me to Roma. One of the few movies that I've ever seen that basically imbues its characters, working class characters, with dignity. And dignity is such an extraordinary and important word. It's one of my favorite words, and especially when it means something. And I think that I'm bringing up Roma because in seeing it for the second time, the first time on Netflix, the second time in the theater, I again saw in that movie this whole notion of a dignified individual, the notion of not a one-dimensional, one stick figure type of representation for working class people. And that's important. And I'm thinking about that because you can have movies that portray people of color. One question is really important, besides how they're portrayed racially, but how are they portrayed in terms of their provenance, where they come from, and the importance of of people's working class roots not being seen in a one-dimensional manner.
Are you talking about the word authenticity?
I'm actually talking about the word dignity.
Yeah.
And the problem with authenticity is the wide interpretation of what is authentic. And if you even look at movies from Latin America, I find it particularly inauthentic when dark-skinned people are not portrayed in movies out of Latin America, which is so often true of Mexico. It's as though, and it's so
Throughout
true
Latin America.
in Brazil.
Yeah.
It's as though black folk don't exist. And so one of the most interesting, I'm going to transition a little bit, one of the most interesting discussions I had was with individuals who watched Black Panther in China, and individuals who I talked to who watched Black Panther in other countries outside the United States, because race has always been a problematic factor in cinematography, and where the movie superseded for many people who this individual had interviewed, had superseded the color of the individuals involved. The movie itself, the action, the setting, the concept, the story, the writing. Now, it's not as though race did not matter. It certainly did. But it was not the only factor. It didn't force people out of the theater. I've gone to, you grew up in Japan, I've gone to theaters in Tokyo and Osaka, where you see the billboards outside the theaters, and it's all white American actors.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it's a couple of years ago, outside of one of those theaters, and for the first time, I saw a person of color portrayed in a billboard. It was, in this case, Denzel Washington for the Equalizer. Yeah. Please.
Well, fortunately, Scarlett Johansson is actually Japanese.
We saw that.
I was going to add to what you were saying. There's this old kind of belief in Hollywood that movies with people of color don't sell abroad, which is an amazing assumption, being that abroad there are a lot of people of color. But somehow it still sticks. And so one of the conversations around Black Panther was, hopefully now, people will sit up and pay attention and see, like, that is no longer an excuse you can give. We keep having these great surprise successes here in the United States, and occasionally, those movies will get, a lower box office estimate on the weekend, and then all of a sudden it'll do wonders, and then everyone's kind of surprised, like, I didn't know people would be interested in a movie like Girls Trip or Crazy Rich Asians. Yes, that was another one that they kind of lowballed at the beginning, and then they're like, oh, there seems to be a lot of interest in this. How weird. And it's, obviously no. People are looking for these stories.
Monica, earlier you were talking about how this will take some time to get more and more because of the process of creating movies and casting. There is this thing that we heard in the Oscars a couple years ago, this idea of the inclusion writer. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, and anybody else who wants to sort of wax on that as well, and how that works?
Sure, that was actually just last year. Frances McDormand came up to the stage and just threw out the word inclusion writer, and a lot of people immediately went to Google and was like, oh, what is this? But basically, it's a part of the contract that a director, actor, producer, anyone that's going to go into business with a studio or a production company would sign, and you include a clause in there that you're going to hire a certain amount of level of women, of people of color, of people from different backgrounds. You'd kind of guarantee that production is going to be diverse. You're going to guarantee that production is inclusive, or that studio or production company is going to be in breach of contract, and you can technically sue. So it's like a big way to push for using your own kind of star power or standing in the industry.
And if you think about it, that, and maybe we can contest this, but I would guess that, and I'm an actor as well. I'm a AFTRA-SAG union actor and a director. So a lot of what I think about is that. But can we find a way to agree that the entertainment industry, specifically acting, casting, is the only part of our economic superpower where we can legally hire people by the skin tone. That when you go to a casting session, it'll say, or or your casting agent is going to set you up for something. Say, we're looking for this, and if it's not that, if you don't look the part, they can just tell you no because that's how they wrote it in. So it's institutionalized racism, it's legal.
Yeah, and the issue with that as well is when they do something like a race-blind casting, where they just won't specify that it's someone, but it usually means the default is white. So then, folks won't get considered at all.
Right. Okay. Let's get some questions in here from the audience.
I'm wondering if there's been any commentary about how I think this is like only the second major movie in recent history that had a black king or prince, and it led me to keep thinking that Eddie Murphy was going to show up, because the only other image I had of like a black king or prince was Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall in Coming to America, which is a wildly different movie. But it's just odd that there would be no other like black king or prince, that I can think of. Maybe Othello, but.
Well, Othello was one of them, yes, indeed. I think you have to go again back to the comic book, to Marvel's. I think Stan Lee was helped. He wasn't the only writer, but one of those who conceptualized this as a way of basically pushing back against racism and bigotry in the 70s. I think it was the 70s that the Black Panther was first introduced. And of course, the name is no accident. The notion of Black Panther, the notion of resistance, being concomitant, recalcitrant, so on and so forth. That was very important. And it hasn't always, of course, taken form in a king or queen. That is, again, this is fairly unique to Marvel. And you're right, when it has occurred in the context of comedy. I can't think of another movie, you're right, where there was a king and a queen, the whole notion of royalty being portrayed on the screen. Now, you do find that frequently in Nigerian movies. That's a fairly common theme in Nigerian movies, but it's really, as you pointed out, very rare here. But I saw something else in this movie too, and I'm thinking about Coogler, I'm thinking about the writers also, because when you think about Africa, this was not a way of creating some monolithic view of what Africa is. Obviously, you have Wakanda with its advanced technology, which you see efforts of that sort in places like South Africa, in Nigeria, but obviously not the same kind of technology that we saw portrayed in the movie here. But you also saw hints of the kind of contradictions I was talking about, where you find someone who is assertive about their people, like Killmonger, but at the same time, Killmonger might remind you in real life of a Sese Seko, the former ruler of the Zaire, who was a terrible human being, or Jonas Savimbi, who was a terrible human being out of Angola. So this was a way of saying, yes, you can be a nationalist, but you could also be autocratic. And so this wasn't a way of just idolizing kings and queens. It was also a way of talking about politics, the politics of a continent, and that's riven with contradictions. I personally don't care so much if it's a king or a queen. I'm not big on royalty, but I am interested in how filmmakers explore contradictions, and I thought the complexity of this one is a good laboratory for understanding politics, external politics, even in an African context, though fictional.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Another question here.
Hi. So something that I feel like I've encountered a lot in the broader sort of casual discourse about representation is this misconception that certain regions or time periods or countries are monolithic. So the ideas are, like, for instance, that there are no people of color in, say, medieval Europe. My sort of working theory has been, assumption has been that this is partly due to lack of representation in film and broader works of culture. So, like, someone watches Lord of the Rings and is like, oh, there must have been no black people in Europe. And I wanted to get your perspectives on whether that rings true to you, and if so, like, what can people do broadly to sort of correct this idea, either in the media or in art creation or in general?
One of the courses I've been teaching for many years is called Race and Ethnic Relations. One of the things we explore is the concept of race and identity in the context of how we describe it in this country and probably in most countries. So the idea of monolithic and identity is often predicated with just the understanding that we can define people in one way or another that's very sort of closed, it's bookended. Asian, for example, or black, that the diaspora is so huge that we really can't. So if we think, let's say even about Crazy Rich Asians, which was, the latest huge feat, the problem for me with the title was that the word Asian encompasses everything from Turkey to most of Russia to Philippines, and so it lends itself to us believing that that is a representation of everyone who is referred to as Asian. Black Panther, the title, and that goes back to what you said earlier, the 60s and 70s, but today, young people don't know about that. All they can think and see is the word black and Black Panther. So I even have a problem with the title. And I know why it was created that way, and I know what his mission was. But today, we're at such an interesting time in this country today where we are learning more and more that in the next 15, 20 years, the average American household is going to be mixed race, same sex, mixed religion. Kids today, my daughter's age, they don't really care. They don't care if you've got, tattoos, if you got green hair, if you're, gender non-specific, whatever it is. And so it's not even binary. It's like so fluid. And so it becomes a difficult discussion. But that said, like I said earlier, for me, the movie was about home. And the idea of home, and what they said at the end of the movie, at the UN speech that he gave, it's that we're all part of the same family. That's the story. So how do we get from representation, which is problematic, to the idea that we really are all one family? That's the contradiction that I love to explore.
I just want to add there too a little bit. We talk about like who's in front of the camera, who we see, but who's behind the camera is who's actually making this. You mentioned casting earlier, and as you were talking about Roma earlier, Philip, I was sort of thinking about this is who's telling whose story. And so for a while, the story was being told through minstrelsy and in cowboy movies through red face and these other depictions. And then we reached a point where folks recognized that was not palatable at the very least, or maybe even wrong, and then this period of omission, of erasure, of we don't know how to characterize you, and therefore we will not include you at all. Although casting directors have no problem, finding Latinas for roles of maids, right? Mm-hmm. And so like there's I can only imagine what that looks like. They need to put up an ad or something, or reach out and say we're looking for people that look like this to be maids, but they can't imagine we need people that look like this to be scientists, right? And that's one of the things that's going to need to change there too. And now you're going to make me look at Lord of the Rings in a completely different view. So
I did want to add to that. There was a great Tumblr a few years back that just looked at medieval paintings and things like that, and found all of the people of color in these paintings, because it's an ahistorical view that all of a sudden like all of Europe was super white. No, people traveled. People took ships. There were wars in different parts of countries and continents. They do exist. So it's kind of trying to put attention back on those folks. So it's kind of like we also need to reevaluate the art that we're creating now, and why do we keep perpetrating that kind of antiquated notion?
Just one, very briefly. I actually thought about this yesterday, and here's why. When a famous photo was shown on national television and the internet yesterday, that of a sailor kissing a woman in Times Square, that's I'm so happy that Lester Holt, by the way, said an enduring photo as opposed to iconic. That word drives me up a tree. As much as it's an important word, it's overused. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I was thinking about it because when you looked at they did a broad look at the scene in Times Square. Hundreds of thousands of people, soldiers having returned from World War II. This extraordinary war that took millions of lives, including 6 million Jews, just millions of lives across the world. And here you have this incredible celebration in Times Square. And you might notice in the NBC, CBS, ABC footage, there are no black people in these pictures. And you might notice also that there are no black soldiers in these pictures. Because how many people would know that the US War Department purposely held back African American soldiers in Europe and in Japan from basically returning at the same time as white soldiers? So they were not there to celebrate because they weren't there at all. And so I would use that photo to tell that story. If it were me, I would use that photo to talk about people who were purposely left behind in order excluded from the picture, literally, and excluded from history in terms of our suppositions of who was there that day and who wasn't, and in terms of our supposition of who fought the war and who didn't. That was a type of representation that seeps into our public consciousness and the type of thing that seeps into our filmmaking.
Well, let's get to these two questions here, and what we'll do is we'll ask relatively brief questions and we'll give relatively brief responses so we have a chance to get to these questions, and also so you can meet these folks before we go. Good.
So it was brought up that that we often don't allow ourselves to appreciate the representation that exists in movies from other countries. So I was thinking that I myself am an immigrant, and if I want to see myself represented in films from my country, well, I have that opportunity whenever I want. But when I see myself represented in movies from the US, I usually see my culture still represented almost entirely by stereotypes. Maybe positive ones, usually negative, but sometimes there are positive ones. So what I think is also very important is not just to see yourself represented, but also to have these films represent your culture positively to the culture that created the films. For instance, with American films, it's important not just for a Latinx American to see themselves as a positive Latinx, but also for non-Latinx to understand that the Latinxes are not what are usually portrayed in film, and to see a more diverse representation of that. So I wanted to see what your thoughts on that were.
Oh, I have many. I'll try and keep it short. But how many people here have seen the movie Coco? Okay, good. Yeah, talking about positive representation, I think a lot of that has to do with the filmmakers going to do the homework, talking to those communities and getting them involved with the filmmaking process. When they first came out with the news that they were going to make this movie based around the Day of the Dead holiday, Disney tried to copyright Day of the Dead. It didn't go over very well, so they were rightfully criticized. And when they decided to use that as an opportunity to reach out to a number of prominent critics who bashed them for trying to do that, and invited them into the production. They had cultural consultants, they had another cartoonist who's Mexican American come and give input and tell people this is inappropriate, or, this would be more culturally specific if you include XYZ things. I think that's why, when a lot of Latinos and Latinx people went to go see Coco, they felt a real connection to that work. When non-Latinx people went to go see it, they had a different impression of Mexican tradition.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, sir, because it really folds well into mine. There was a lot of excitement a while ago when Slumdog Millionaire won Best Picture. Of course, it was written by a Scottish man and directed by a Scottish man, saying that now would be the time for more Bollywood pictures to come into American consciousness, and that just never happened. What do you think is the prospects following Black Panther for a more diverse international milieu to come into American cinema?
I think that has a lot to do with how we expect and accept different points of view. I mean, when you think about it, even Japanese anime is just wrong. You think about when you look at Japanese anime, right, which is it's the largest part of animation, the animation industry in the world, right? They don't look Japanese. I mean, let's just say that they don't. They are trying to look not Japanese. They're trying to look like Scarlett Johansson. The big eyes, the thin nose, the white skin, the long legs, and all that. It's a disease. So it's not that necessarily the representation needs to come from elsewhere. It's going back to what you were both saying too, is that it has to come from here first, if it's Hollywood. But being able to bring outside points of view has a lot to do with how we even teach history. If you're in school and you're studying history, and the history textbooks are written by white Christian men with PhDs or whatever, then that's their perspective of history. You don't have Native Americans writing history books. Period. You don't have Japanese Americans writing about the internment camps. You have a certain group of people that write the movies, produce the movies, write the books, write the textbooks. So when you're a kid and you're in school and you're watching TV or movies after school, you're watching what people are creating because that's all they know. So if we truly lived in a country where we were open to new ideas, and as parents we offered our kids opportunities to see movies and read books by other people, classics, like when you talk about the classics, have you read the classics, They talk about all the names we know. They don't talk about classics like people talk about classics music. When you say classical music, everyone thinks European music, Vivaldi and Mozart. There is a ton of music that's called classic music in other parts of the world that you'll never even hear, that you heard in the movie tonight. You heard elements of that. So our job as parents and teachers and mentors is to offer young people a sense of what the world is like by giving them the opportunity to read and experience life written and produced by people who are not here.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Spot on. I tried not to be overly critical. I saw Slumdog Millionaire and actually enjoyed the movie, really enjoyed the movie. But it was amazing the reaction that movie got when I spoke with people in a Mumbai slum, the very same Mumbai slum, about the movie. They hated it. But they were happy that it was shown in the United States, because it was almost to the point where at least you see some idea of how we're living here in Mumbai, here in this particular slum. So the notion of some representation, and I won't accept any representation, but it was at least not a horrible, terrible representation of Indians in this country through a movie, the movie Slumdog Millionaire. And I mention it because the folks who were most critical of it are, again, the folks who I'm focus on in this series coming up this week on WGBH, which are caste, low-caste people, so-called low-caste people, particularly those formerly known as untouchables, people called Dalits, broken people as the term goes. But the people I spoke with, including one kid who did his thesis on Slumdog Millionaire, again, his joy was at least that the movie was in the United States. Now, I had a very different reaction when I spoke to someone a few weeks ago about The Wall, the movie that starred Matt Damon, which was, and where...
Explain it a little bit.
Exactly. Anyone see The Wall? Okay, well...
It's not about Donald Trump.
And the notion of seeing Chinese representation, that was not it. And that was, in fact, I wouldn't even say it's good sci-fi representation. But the point is that the point she was making was that Chinese producers, those who worked with American producers on this film, have to take some responsibility. I understand it was their decision, their desire to cast a white actor in this role, hoping that American audiences, those of you who now hate the film, would go see the film. It's okay. So that is one of the. Anyway, that's what the set of contradictions again. That one set of contradiction we're dealing with. It's representation. Quite often, it is far from ideal, and then sometimes it's just really bad.
If I can give a super quick technical answer to your question, a lot of it has to do with models of distribution right now. There is a kind of known and accepted fact that Americans don't go to movies with subtitles. Like, there's a big drop off. If it's not in English, we just don't go to it. And you actually need to kind of combat that. You need to buy tickets to those movies, so there'll be more of those movies coming in, because it's a very capitalist system. If the showings are selling out, they'll keep booking them. They'll keep looking for those kinds of movies.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Learn a foreign language. Like,
Yeah. Did you all pay for The Wall? Did you pay to see that film? No. Okay. All right. I was just curious. You did pay for that? All right. We're gonna talk after this. I want to wrap this up. Monica, I have one question for you, though, actually. You and I both had the opportunity to be at Sundance this year. I saw an amazing film called The Farewell with Awkwafina, which highly recommend when that comes out to see. Is there anything else that we should see, that you see coming down the pipe, that's going to end up on the screens here, or maybe even on a streaming service, that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think we were also a big fan of a documentary called Knock Down the House, which was a view of 4 women running for Congress, and one of those women were Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think it's a really great look at the sort of grassroots campaign and what it takes to actually, work up the nerve to knock on doors and to make your own posters and run for Congress. It was really remarkable. There's also a documentary, it doesn't have distribution yet, so fingers crossed, but it's called The Infiltrators, which is a story about dreamers, activist dreamers who infiltrate an immigration detention center in Florida to break a dad out who had been arrested randomly without any warrant or anything. They just picked him off out of his house. And it was a really interesting look at the Obama era situation that this took place in. So they used both recreation of what happens in that detention center and footage from the time that they were, trying to break into a detention center. But yeah, The Farewell was also really good. There were a number of really interesting movies at Sundance, and it seems like a lot of streaming services and companies were picking up some of the smaller films that maybe we wouldn't have heard from again, and now we're gonna get to see those. Another big one was Late Night, which was written by Mindy Kaling, and she's the main star opposite Emma Thompson, which is really exciting to see. Amazon Prime bought that up, so lots to look forward to.
Here we go. So before we give a warm round of applause thanking our panelists for tonight, I do want to also say thank you for coming here. Thank you to the folks at the Coolidge Corner Theatre that continue to host the series and partner on this series. Love them. The folks that have been filming, the folks at the ticket booth and at the concessions, my buddy Mark over here who I work with on this series, Midnight Mark. And let's give one final round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for being here.